Well, we are at our time to get started tonight. Sure is good to see everybody here. I guess I need to turn on my microphone. I don't know if the microphone actually helps in the back as so much as it picks up for if you're listening online. So that's our usefulness there. Glad to see everybody here with us tonight. And we are in the book of Judges, chapter 16. Last lesson talking about Samson. I do love to talk about Samson. And there's going to be a lot of things we're going to want to talk about tonight when we talk about Samson. And this is our opportunity to do that. Before we get started, let's have a word of prayer. Would you join me? Most holy God and Father in heaven, we thank you for the blessing you give us that in the middle of our week, we can take a pause from our life and from all the things that surround us and set them aside and focus on your word. And tonight, as we learn about your servant Samson and we see his fall and his demise, Father, we pray that we take to heart the things that we'll learn here and make application in our lives. Father, thank you again for the blessing you give us in your word. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. So Samson is a judge for 20 years, and so he's not necessarily a young guy anymore when we're coming along here in verse 16, in chapter 16, and I got to get it because I'm in the wrong book, chapter 16 of Judges. Two stories here that we're probably the most familiar with. But just to kind of start us off, and we're not answering these questions yet, I just want you to be thinking about it. The big questions about Samson, and we talked about this last week. What makes Samson righteous? Why is he somebody that the Bible wants us to think of as a righteous man? And I made a big push last week about his prayer whenever he's fought the enemy, and he begs God, you gave this victory. And I said that there's probably a hint of his character there about what it is about him that makes him righteous. And that hint is that he's somebody who, despite the fact he did great things, he saw God as the one that gave him the glory. And that's a big deal. That's a big deal to God. Certainly, like I said, it's something to consider, especially if you're a man of great strength and great renown. It would be tempting to take the credit for that kind of thing. Second question, why is he considered a man of faith? Because he called on God repeatedly, and we'll see him do it yet again in this chapter as well. The last question we're going to talk about is about tonight, and it's Delilah. It's Delilah. And it's the question everybody always asks every time you talk about this, and we'll come back to this one, okay? We'll be coming back to this one. Well, Samson's life is one that's interesting throughout the area. He travels a lot of different places. He's mainly down in the region of Dan, so in this area here, we'll be up in this area as well tonight whenever he meets Delilah. I like maps that kind of give me a sense of all the different places that he goes to. Judges chapter 16, verses 1 through 3. Can I get a reader for that? Judges 16, 1 through 3. Go.
Samson went to Gaza, and there he saw a prostitute, and he went into her. The Gazites were told, Samson has come here, and they surrounded the place and set an ambush for him all night at the gate of the city. They kept quiet all night, saying, let us wait till the light of morning, then we will kill him. But Samson lay till midnight, and at midnight he arose and took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the two posts, and pulled them up, bar and all, and put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that is in front of people.
So, what a little story. I guess it starts off with the whole thing of Samson going to see a prostitute. Certainly something that, again, a man who is godly, it's a sin. The old law isn't quite as clear about the concepts of fornication as the new law is, but let's not deny the idea that this is something ungodly for sure. He goes though to Gaza, and that's the place of the Philistines. The Philistines, you might Gaza's in the news a lot today, and the words that they use to describe the people there is, what do they call the people in Gaza today? Palestinians. That's the word Philistine. It comes from the same word, so it's kind of an ancient connection. They're not the Philistines, but that name attaches itself to that region still. So it's kind of interesting how that is. So Gaza is the Philistines, one of the 5 cities, and you would think a man who has made a lot of enemies of the Philistines would be smarter than to go to the town of the Philistines. And yet I have to wonder if this is one of those moments where God is saying he was provoked. And it says that when they tried to lock him in, he goes to the city gate. Well, here is a rebuilt city gate for one of the other 5 cities of the Philistines, the city of Ashkelon. So I'm going to suggest to you that a gate would have looked something like this, or the entry area would have been something like this. So you have this this rounded arch, and it's about 12 feet tall, and whatever gates there were could have been square flush to the front, or they could have been something that was fitted in to do it. And so he pulls them up out of the ground. It's a remarkable thing, but more remarkable, where does he take them? Yeah, so going back to our map here, he's over here in Gaza, and he's going to take them all the way over here to Hebron. It does say the hill in front of Hebron. Some people have wondered if this meant he just took them to some of the direction. But what's kind of interesting, by the way, is not only does he take it all the way over here to Hebron, this is all uphill too. So this is a really remarkable moment. So this isn't just a little, what a strange little story. This is a wow. That's something remarkable. And by the way, if you stole the front gates off of the city gates, what does that do to the city? Yeah, leaves it wide open, leaves it unprotected. At the bare minimum, you'd say it's very embarrassing to have to call your neighbors and say, by the way, you guys ain't got any spare city gates. Some guy just up and took ours. That would be a remarkable thing. And what he did in this moment was remarkable. And it's just trying to give us this sense of the kind of things that Samson does. I almost wish this story had been stuck in right before, because you had before this a series of these events in his life of him doing incredible things. And this is one more of those series. And yet, I also understand why it's stuck here, because it's also gauging us towards his weakness. And of course, that is his attraction to women, that is his big problem. And now we meet the one that is well known, perhaps the best, as the greatest problem. Let's go ahead and read verses 1 through 5, if we would. Or, I'm sorry, 4 and 5. Go ahead, Isaac.
After this, he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, "Seduce him and see where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to humble him. And we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver."
So we meet this woman, Delilah. Of the women in his life, his wife, they had early on this woman we just talked about a moment ago. This is the only person whose name is given to us, and her name means languishing, kind of to be wasting away or to be suffering. Kind of an interesting name that she has here. And it's interesting because the relationship is a little different than the other relationships, because how does Samson look at her? I think it's kind of important. What does Samson look at her? It says, and Samson loved her. And Samson loved her. Now, it never actually says whether or not she's an Israelite. It's usually assumed she's not, by the fact that the Philistines went to her, and that she bribed, and But like I said, it isn't clear necessarily what her background is. But I want to say it's really significant that it says that Samson loved her. It doesn't say she loved Samson. It's kind of interesting. It's implied they have an intimate relationship. Of course, it also is maybe strongly implied that they're not married in that. So again, we have a situation that shouldn't be going on, and this is going to be kind of important for us to consider what's going on here. So the Philistines come to her and they say, "We will give you a bribe. We will give you." Some Bibles say 5,500. Some say 1,100 pieces of silver. Kind of interesting. They're describing the idea, and this is like a silver catch from the area, that they would just take pieces of silver. If you were a silver worker, a piece broke off, that would be like a coin. So they didn't mint coins perhaps in these earlier times, but they would use pieces of silver like this, and you would have these things to be bribed with. And so they offer this bribe to her, and she accepts it. Can I have somebody read? Let's go ahead and do 6, 7, and 8. 6, 7, 8, 9. 6, 7, 8, 9. Please.
So Delilah said to Samson, Tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued. Samson answered her, if anyone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been tried, I'll become as weak as any other man. Then the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she tied him with them. With men hidden in the room, she called to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. But he snapped the bowstrings as easily as a piece of string snaps when it comes close to a flame. So the secret of his strength was not discovered.
So, tell me what your strength is, and tell me the way that somebody could hurt you. That has to be the most red flag statement. And by the way, if you're ever dating somebody, you met somebody and they said, hey, tell me the way that I could destroy your life. That's an indication that this isn't a healthy relationship. That should be obvious. But I'm going to come back to this again, and I'm going to hint to you where I'm thinking our answer lies. Isn't it interesting, though, that a lot of times these red flags, even in our lives, get ignored? We don't really pay attention to the warning signs of bad things coming. So warning number 1, she says, what makes you weak? And he says, well, bowstrings. If it's a new bowstring, then I'm no good. So number 1, they tie him up. Now, I'll tell you what, we won't read this next. We'll just kind of jump over these. So verse 10, she says, look, you're making fun of me. What's the real thing? Now, again, you would be thinking, I told you before, and oddly enough, I suddenly woke up with those things on me. That's kind of strange. So he tells her another story. Does he realize how, is he just playing a game? What's he going on? So he tells her this next time. He says, well, verse 11, if you bind me with new ropes that have never been used, then that's the one. So new ropes come along. They're lying in wait. She says, the Philistines are here, Samson. He breaks out. He thrashes these guys. By the way, I'd hate to be the guys that they keep saying, hey, we're going to go get Samson. This is the 3rd time we're doing that, right? How does this go every time? So you do think that's kind of interesting too. But of course, 2nd time, he deceives her. Verse 13, Delilah says to Samson, until now you've mocked me. You told me lies. Tell me with what you may be bound with. Now, I know most of you already know what his true strength is. And of course, the significance of his true strength, for a lot of people in the world, if you asked them what was Samson's strength, they'd say his hair. But that wouldn't be true, right? It would be what? It would be God. But his oath as a Nazarite is his connection to God. His faithfulness to that is his connection to God. So, of course, we understand that. And I only mention it here to say, seems like he's getting closer to it, though, this time, doesn't he? He says, well, if you were to leave 7 locks of my head in the web of a loom. Now, your next question is going to be, Brian, how on earth does that happen? How do you know, how could you be asleep or whatever the circumstance was, and somebody could weave your head up like in a loom? I'll tell you what, I'm not having hair, I'm not an expert, but I would think that that's certainly something that would draw your attention right away. So it's very unusual. I don't know exactly how to imagine what happened here, but verse 14 says that she does it. She wove his hair tightly in the batten of a loom and said, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. But he wakes up from his sleep. He pulls it out, the batten and the web from the loom. So this is again another threat. So at this point, she kind of pulls out the big gun. Can I have somebody read verses 14 through 17? 14 through 17. 14 through 17. George, go.
So while he slept, Delilah took the 7 locks of his hair and wove them into the web. And she fastened it with a pin and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he awoke from his sleep and pulled out the pin of the loom of the web. Then she said to him, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have deceived me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength is. And it came about when she pressed him daily with the words encouraged him, that his soul was anointed with 17.
Yeah. I made a mistake. I should have said 15, 16, 17. But yes, please.
So he told her all that was in his heart, and said to her, a razor has never come to on my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man.
So one of the things I think is kind of interesting here is, of course, number one, our big question is going to be why. And like I said, we'll come back to that. I think that's important to consider. I think there's something really significant about that. Why would you tell her this? But I guess maybe another question I have is, how would Samson know? In part, he's never had his head shaved before. He says a razor had never touched me. And it's not exactly that's the conversation that his parents had with the angel of the Lord a few chapters ago. It never said that if there was, in fact, in the conversation, it wasn't a conversation about his strength. His strength comes upon him in these moments. And so how do you think Samson knows that it's the hair that's the thing? What do you think here? What do you think, Josie? What do you got? Great.
The vow itself says that you're to shave your head,
right,
and then grow it, and then after a certain amount of time, maybe a year or so, I think.
Yeah, it doesn't say how long, but we usually guess it's a year.
And then after your vow is done, then you shave it off again, and then you give it to
the priests.
The priest as a sacrifice.
Yeah, it's like you're like a living sacrifice,
like a living sacrifice.
Right.
So it was.
So Josie, of course, is pointing out that the Nazarite vow that most people took was just a temporary vow. You took it for, and Josie mentioned maybe a year. That's usually our guess. And you'd shave your head, you'd let your hair grow out, then you'd shave it a second time, and you'd offer it up. Now, being a Nazarite from birth, and who are our other two, by the way, remember? Who are the other two Nazarites from birth in the Bible? Samuel, and John the Baptist. Very good. It's kind of a big deal. So our other guys, they were from birth, so they never had a razor touch their heads. So that's kind of an interesting thing to think about too. So Josie reminds us, that their vow is kind of unique. Greg, what do you think?
Well, his parents weren't any dummies, and he wasn't either. He was raised in the Jewish faith. Obviously, they told him that he was a Nazarite or had been set aside Nazarite vow from birth. Even in the previous chapter, they talked about God allowing him to do something. I can't remember what it was, because that's what he wanted him to do.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So he knew he was set aside for something special for God, and it has to do with the Nazarite vow. I would think that this would be, the whole thing with Samson, it looks like he's a pawn.
Yeah.
What God wants Judah to see.
Oh, interesting, Greg. Yeah. Okay.
Because I've asked you 3 times, and surely you don't love me because you won't tell me the truth. Things that he's done in secret, and yet tried to keep hidden from his parents, the honey and the lion. So the whole scenario with Samson is not just as a judge, but also as a example to Judah as far as how they are treating God.
All right, Greg, a couple of points that Greg made. And Greg, we're going to come back to that, because one of our big questions is, how is Samson basically an image of Israel? And you kind of said it. It's kind of like, you kind of alluded to the idea of how how does Israel treat God? There's something significant about comparing Samson to Israel itself as an interesting comparison. So I want to pause for a second and say, we'll come back to that one. That's really good. But you also said that no doubt he understands he has this connection with God. He knows God uses him, and God is his strength. And so Greg is kind of perhaps tying us to the idea that he sees the vow. Now, I might throw one or two more things. Oh, Wendy, you got it. Go.
Oh, well, no, I was just going to say in verse 20, he almost acts like he doesn't realize that his strength is going to be gone.
Yeah, interesting, right? And I always wondered, does it mean he didn't know his hair was gone? I tell you what, when your hair's gone, you realize that.
Well, I wonder if he thinks that Delilah won't really do it.
Oh, yeah, sure.
He already, bluffed 3 times, and those were pretty
right.
insignificant. I mean, and then if I tell you cut off my hair, surely she's not going to do that.
Right, because that would kill me.
Yeah.
That would destroy me. Yeah, I want to come back to that because, again, I think the big idea is what did he think was going to happen? And I think why is even more important. Let me just throw one more thing out there. There are other aspects of this vow as well, like not touching dead things. But interestingly enough, what has Samson done? A lot. I would suggest that perhaps the point is this is the unique part of the vow that is the thing that he hasn't broken. He's not been great about keeping himself set apart. We've talked about that in the past with the lion and all the other things that he's done. He's not been dedicated, but it seems like at least this one he has. So I see at least some of the issue being that Samson knows I haven't done a lot of these things, but this one I've done. So perhaps this is the one that is really the critical one. Go ahead, Lamar.
I was just going to say a couple of the things that we read in chapter 14 and 15. He had ripped apart the bear, so it seems like he has a lot of strength. And then with a jawbone, he gets slain 1,000. So he had extraordinary strength, whether he connected it with the vow or long hair or whatever.
Yeah. And again, like with the, especially with the victory over the over the Philistines, he knew God was behind it. He knew that God was behind it. And so he says, I'm a Nazarite to God. I'm a set apart to God. And he knew, like I said, again, he's not some, half-witted pagan. He knows God is his power. He knows God is his power. And he knows that this vow he's keeping is part of that. Now, there's something kind of neat to think about here in the well, actually, let's just go ahead and go where we're going with this. So she lulls him to sleep. Verse 19 says she then shaves the 7 locks off of his head. I often wonder what it would look, Greg and I talked about this before. What does it look like if your hair grows all your life? I mean, he's probably 40s, so his hair's always been growing. And what is that like? And, I think Grant and I were talking later, or maybe Daria and I were talking about the idea of, heard of dreadlocks, that's kind of a natural thing you might go to, and 7 locks of it, I can only imagine. But she sits down and she shaves his head. Verse 20, she yells it again. He jumps up. When he makes a point, though, he doesn't realize that God's not with him now. God's not with him now. And let me read verse 21. The Philistines took him and put out his eyes and brought him to Gaza. They bound him with bronze fetters, and he became a grinder in the prison. So now he's been brought down. What a humiliating and horrible penalty that he has been put through. So let's go ahead and answer the first question. Talk about the first question that I really want to talk about. Oh, Wendy, go ahead.
Well, I find it interesting in this one. She doesn't do it this time. She calls someone else to come in and do it. So why did she?
Oh, yeah.
Because, I don't know. I just found that an interesting little. The first 3 times it says she did it, what he said, but this time she calls someone else.
I missed that. Anybody got an answer to that? I didn't notice that before. That it says that this time she called somebody. Grant, you've got the answer. Oh,
because it also says that she begins to torment him. And I was also wondering what's that?
Well, and I don't know other than the Samson, the Philistines are upon you. She's poking him or something. I don't know. She lulled him to sleep. He's out. I've been sleeping well, and I've had people in my family torment me to wake me up. So I don't know. I thought about that. Anybody have an answer to this? Why she might have called somebody? Greg, what do you think?
Oh, no, each time it says she made him to sleep.
Yeah.
So I wonder, because he's not opposed to drink a little bit of wine.
Well, see, here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, and again, which is interesting because it's an anti-Nazarite thing. He's not supposed to. But I think what's ironic is he's giving up all of his Nazarite vows with this woman. So maybe liquor had something to do with it. I think alcohol doesn't say it, but I really suspect that's how you get somebody to go to sleep, and you're able to tie them up and to shave their head and to put a loom in their head. I mean, really, that's crazy.
Well, the other thing was calling a man to come in to shave his head, a barber.
Barber. Yeah.
Maybe she wasn't really versed in that.
Yeah, how to shave. It might be true that you didn't know how to shave, Paula.
So one time that mentions the stuff that he fell asleep on her lap.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Maybe she couldn't get
It's a little
up.
harder to sneak out from underneath somebody and stuff. And
That actually,
Dominic just falls asleep on the bed after telling her how to tie.
Yeah. Actually, Paula, that might be the answer. That might be what's going on. I hadn't thought of put that together like that, but that might be exactly what's happening. I'm very, very good putting it together. See, so I want to hit the big question. The big question. Why? Samson, Samson has to have had some sense that every time I've told her what's going on, lo and behold, this thing has happened. What is it? Go ahead.
I was thinking of, I mentioned earlier that, he wakes up and he thinks, I'm going to go out like every other time. I'm thinking of the idea that I think a lot of times, we or other people will sometimes think, well, I'll sin and God will still be with me.
Yeah. Why?
I think you and I were talking a while ago about, the doctrine that comes up of people who say, you can sin all you want and God will just always forgive you no matter what. You don't have to worry about it.
Why? So let's build on that a little bit, Grant, because that's a really good answer. Why is it that it might be reasonable for Samson to think, well, yeah, okay, I shouldn't have done this, but God will still be with me because why?
They're still God's enemies.
They're still God's enemies. I'm still God's servant. I'm God's judge, and God wouldn't want me to fail. And I think that's a pretty natural assumption that if I'm doing God's will, even if I'm not doing it the right way, God doesn't want me to fail. And there's a big lesson in that thought. By the way, there's a couple of big lessons here. One of them is sometimes we just think that the physical things aren't important, and yet they can be critically important. How many people would say, I don't need to get baptized, there's something you have to do, and yet, the Bible says, he that believes and is baptized is saved, that is the critical thing. It's sometimes, like Samson's hair, you think, well, is it really that big a deal if you cut his hair off? Well, apparently it is. Apparently, doing what God says matters. And apparently, even God's enemies will win if we don't do what's right. And that might be a big part of this answer. That you might be tempted to think, okay, I didn't do it right, but I know God still wants the Philistines put in their place. Because this isn't Israel messing up. This is what's interesting about him as a judge versus all the other times. All the other times, Israel messes up and God's enemies overcome. This time, the judge messes up and his enemies overcome. So good point. Greg got another thought. Go ahead.
If, from what you're saying, people have a tendency to trust too much in the grace and excuse what they are doing, and so that mindset kind of keeps nudging them away from God.
Yeah. And Greg, I can easily see, let's say us as a church saying, well, okay, we don't really focus too hard on the things that God tells us we have to do, but we're the light of the world. And there wouldn't be a church in our community if we weren't doing it. So God will always be with us. And that's a dangerous way to think, because God will let catastrophes happen. If and I shouldn't say catastrophe. I will say God will let evil win whenever we're not doing what's right. That's an important idea, that part of the victory is as much doing it God's way as it is the outcome of doing it God's way.
When is one sin too many?
Yeah. And you know what? That's an interesting point. Hear what Greg said. When is one sin too many? And he has been doing that, right? He is, I touch a lot of dead bodies. Well, seems like, alcohol might not be something he abstains from. He's with women all the time in an inappropriate way. What is one more sin? But apparently it's this one that's one too many, that utterly saps him. So that's great. Yeah. Any other comments? I got one more thought to throw at this, but Greg or Doug, what do you got?
I disagree with Greg just a little bit.
Good. Let him have it.
Well, faith, how do we show our faith? By doing works.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think maybe some people do think, okay, grace is going to save us. But I think too often, I've seen so many faithful Christians worry about not making it to head because they're not doing things right.
Yeah.
And boy, they're just on everything.
Yeah.
To me, I should be able to relax and enjoy being faithful to God, and that is because of grace.
Yeah. You know, it's kind of interesting to think about how does grace work, and this is a whole different conversation, but it's a good one. I just did a study this morning in 2 Peter 1 and talking about this, applying all diligence and being certain you're saved because you're doing, and diligence isn't perfection, diligence is just doing your best. And God is saying, you know, here's Peter saying, God is saying it through Peter, that if you are diligent, you know, you have a promise of salvation, and that's a great point. Now, what's interesting, though, is that Samson is the other side of this. Samson is the guy who's saying, well, okay, I don't worry about the dead bodies thing. Well, okay, I'm not worrying about the staying away from the alcohol and you know, keeping my body a temple. And he just keeps compromising. And what I think is that God's mercy has a limit. Now, where else do we see God's mercy having a limit in the Bible? Where's probably the best example? And this is where I said a moment ago, this is Samson's actual story, is he is an allegory for this. How about the nation of Israel? To say Samson is an allegory of the nation of Israel is to point out that time and time again, Israel transgresses. God says, you guys got to get it right. Israel transgresses. God says, you got to get right. Israel transgresses. God says, look, there's a penalty to this. If you don't get right, you're going to get it. And then Israel's shocked whenever they're taken away into captivity. They're just blown away. They're blinded and they're put to the mill. And so it's kind of interesting to say there's something here about this. The other thing, by the way, where I compare Samson to Israel is this great strength that was really God. Israel could have beat any nation in the world. I'll say this carefully because I sound political if I'm not. Ancient Israel, the kingdom of David, could have conquered the United States. Why do I say that? Because God was with them. They could have conquered anybody. Like Samson, their strength was extraordinary in the Lord. But they lost that sense of it over time because they lost the Lord. And I even think there's a sense where the glory in the hair plays to this a little bit, because in 1 Corinthians 11, there's a conversation about your hair. And that conversation about your hair tells us what about hair? What is it? To a woman, it says a woman's hair is her, it's her glory, but it's her covering, and it's her glory. And, you know, this idea of her relationship with her husband and submission and her relationship with God. And Samson's hair is like that. It's a part of the glory of God. And he gave away the glory of God. He, like Esau, like so many others, like Israel, he gave away the glory of God. And then suddenly, in the moment, he was just like, what is he saying? He doesn't say, I'm weaker than any man. He says, I'm just like everybody else. Suddenly the nation of Israel is just like everybody else because they gave away their glory. And I think Samson is an allegory for the story of Israel. Go ahead, Tacho.
Did he get too complacent? Is that the word?
Complacent is a good word, yeah, because maybe it is, somebody mentioned earlier, like every time he jumps up and he overcomes it, and he just thinks God will keep giving him a break. I keep breaking God's rules, maybe God will keep giving me a break. It doesn't. I want to add one more. Oh, George, go ahead, and then we'll.
When I was thinking on this, at the beginning of the book of Judges, the statement is made that everyone did what was right in their own eyes.
Yeah.
At that time, Samson asked.
Yeah, that's a good point. Grant, I said this will be the last comment, but I've still got you and Michael, so I'm going to let you guys break the rule because I'm very merciful. See. So Grant and Michael, and then we're done. So
let me just say, I think somebody's talking about Samson jumps up and he defeats Philistines. It doesn't actually say he ever fights the Philistines the other 3 times that she.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, you're right.
It seems like they're kind of waiting in the other room to see does he get stuck or does he break free.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah.
I think maybe part of Samson's thing here is maybe he's kind of been fooled into thinking this is just about Delilah.
It's a joke. It might be. That might be it too, Grant. That's a good point. I like your other one better, but that's a good point. That is a good point. Michael, what do you got?
What I noticed is that it's like he didn't realize the Lord had left him. It doesn't mean he didn't notice he didn't have his hair anymore? Because previously, the killing 1,000 men with the jaw bone of a donkey, that part of a dead animal.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
It worked while I
Yeah.
something, so then he
Yeah, I think it's interesting that it says he doesn't know the Lord has left him. And I've wondered about that because you're right. It doesn't say that, I mean, you would know if there was an actor that had a lot of hair and he talked about the idea that the hair weighed so much it caused him health problems. You would know if 45 years of hair suddenly was gone from your head, you'd know it right away. But he doesn't know the Lord has left him. And by the way, I think it's kind of interesting to say he doesn't know the Lord has left him. So many people want to believe that the Lord being with them is something they feel and they can tell, but there's a lot of times in the Bible where it'll say something like the Lord left this person and they didn't know it. They weren't aware of it, and I find that interesting too. So that's a really neat point to say, again, one more time, I think maybe this, I want to add one more thought before I move on. I think it's love. I think the whole idea is Samson is blind because he's let himself fall, to use our vernacular, to fall in love. And what do we do when we fall in love? What kind of glasses do you put on? Somebody said it. Rose-colored glasses. What are we saying?
Love is blind.
Love is blind. Yeah, love is blind. Now Samson's blind, ironically. Love is blind. Rose-colored glasses. What do we say? We all acknowledge this. That whenever we're just totally, overwhelmed in these feelings, it's a very dangerous. It's a very, the book of Song of Solomon. One of the big things in the Song of Solomon is, don't awaken love till it's time. Watch out, love is like a fire. It'll consume. It's just this admonition to say, don't lose control. That's what I think happened here. I think in a big way, Samson is just because, like I said. Delilah over and over again. You would think, I'm getting it, red flags. But, it's all the time people have red flags with a relationship with somebody. And they just say, but my feelings. And by the way, this isn't, obviously it's Delilah deceiving him. But Jeremiah says, what's the most deceitful thing there is? The heart. And what does he mean? I think he's saying that sometimes our feelings, we'll always listen to him. And I think that's where he's at here, is that he's let himself fall into this situation where even if all of the pointers are Delilah is not your friend, he can't make the choice because he's blinded himself in that way. And so this is it. Josie, and a couple more comments and we'll move on.
The way your first question says, why did Samson ultimately tell Delilah his secret?
Yeah.
And in verse 16, it says that she was such a nagging person
That's true.
Day, all day long, until he was sick to death.
Yeah, vexed to death. So that's actually a black and white answer, isn't it?
Yeah,
in that way.
If you've ever been around somebody that's been a nag, it is horrible.
Yeah.
And you just can't get away from it.
Yeah.
And so I think that might have been a small part of it.
Yeah.
Some of part of it that she.
I think that's the breaking point. And I think everything else we're describing is the reasoning that the breaking point, why he doesn't say, I need to move on. I need to go. It might be the catch here. But I think you're completely correct to say there actually is a black and white statement here that she was constantly pressuring him about this and that he just couldn't handle it. And again, he could have handled it. But it's interesting that it vexed him the way it did.
Also because that he loved her.
Yeah.
Sometimes he just give in.
Sure.
You mentioned a minute ago about Israel and that they could get anyone. So you look at this verse where it says the Lord departed. There were times Israel lost battles.
That's right. Yeah. Very specifically, the Bible is critical to say that, like, whether it was Ai or it was the time of Eli, that there were these moments where they got wiped out in battle and they're kind of shocked and they had left God, or more correct, God had left them, because of that. So these are the great points. So like I said, this is fascinating. A lot of what we're trying to draw is we're trying to say what is the life lesson here, and of course, like I said, it is why is it that Samson thinks that he can do all this and it's okay. We'll go ahead and move on because we're going to be out of time here shortly. Chapter 16, verses 22 on. Verse 22 says, his hair of his head began to grow after it had been shaven. Lords of the Philistines gathered together to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their god and rejoice. And listen to these guys. And they said, our God has delivered into our hands Samson, our enemy. They go on to say, when the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, our God has delivered into our hands our enemy, the destroyer of our land, and the one who multiplied our dead. Kind of interesting how the Philistines are behaving. They're now saying, well, look what our gods have done. Look at how much our gods, and specifically their god Dagon, he's mentioned several times in the Bible, our God has done, and he's done all this, and he's brought this great victory, and they're celebrating this, they're getting married. It says they call Samson in. They want to see him. They want to, assumedly, mock him. They called for Samson from prison. He performed for them. I don't know exactly what we can imagine by that. They stationed him between the two pillars. So Samson said to the lad who held him by the hand, he says, well, let me feel the pillars which support the temple so I can lean on them. By the way, this is kind of neat. They excavate Philistine temples in Israel. There are a number of them. And a lot of them have two central pillars. Here's a picture of them. And they would be about, for a pretty big guy, but, you could just about have your hands on either one. And what it would be is typically they had a stone base, and they think the pillars were actually made of wood in a lot of occasions. But here's a picture of what one of those ancient temples looked like with the two pillars in the middle of the temple. And they think some of them had maybe more pillars, and so this could have. In fact, some people think that the one in Gaza was much larger and had a whole row of pillars, and so it might be the case it isn't just two pillars, but he's putting his hands on two pillars and he's going to push them towards a number of pillars if that's the case. So Samson, verse 28, Samson called to the Lord, saying, "O Lord God, remember me, I pray. Strengthen me, I pray, just this once, O God, that I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines for my two eyes." I pointed this out before. Samson talks a lot about vengeance. He's brought this up a number of times. He puts his hands on the pillars and he pushes them. Verse 30, he says, "Let me die with the Philistines." He pushed with all his might. The temple fell on the lords and all the people who were in it, and the dead were killed at his death. And so the dead that he killed at his death were more than he had killed in his life. So his brothers and his father's household came, took him, and brought him and buried him. We'll just stop here. Why do you think God heard Samson in prison? What do you think, Lamar?
Because there's always a purpose for Samson. So I think it was God's purpose to bring him to this place at this time, and that's also why he recorded people. It wasn't he was a good character. He had good purpose, and he fulfilled that purpose.
So what's interesting, and I think that's actually a really good answer for us to consider. Samson's, from his beginning, he was born with a purpose, with a goal. God said, he's going to be separate for my punishment against the Philistines. Why does God not like the Philistines? Not because he just doesn't like them, but why? Why in particular does God not like the Philistines? Who do they acknowledge? Dagon. What are they doing right now, George? They're having a party for a false god. Yeah. So they're being pretty offensive to God right now. So one of the things I think about, and I like what Lamar said, here's his purpose, is to stop that kind of thing. And they brought Samson out in the midst of this, and Samson says, well, let me have the power. Now, what's interesting is his hair had grown back. But what does that not mean? Oh, yeah. It wasn't that his hair was the power. God was his power. But his hair was his covenant with God. Now, again, there's a lot to think about. I've run us out of time, unfortunately, to talk about it, but there's a lot to think about. Greg, what do you got?
So, if we're using Samson as an allegory for Israel,
taken away his hair, made him dead to God, separated him from God. His hair growing back, him pleading for vengeance or being repentant. God gave him the strength to do in a new Israel what is available now, but not then.
So I don't know if this is kind of the point you're hitting on, Greg, but one of the things I see is that Israel was restored after the captivity to a lesser state. And I see Samson as being like that, restored to a lesser state than they were before. A slave nation, to be sure. The Israelites never ruled themselves again, but they were restored, in a sense, to a lesser state for one last push, literally.
Yeah, I was thinking, I mean, that's good. I was thinking more along the lines of a spiritual Israel in that the new covenant where Christ died as part of the old, living under the old covenant, but we are raised into a new covenant Israel. God has given us the power or the option, our own personal selection to join him or to live by his law.
Yeah.
Rather than,
I think.
I don't know if that might be a long stretch out there.
You know, I think that's pretty good, though. I think I like it when we think about the idea that the covenant of Christ and its unique nature has a lot of plays that we can pull on the Old Testament. We're now past our time. Don't have to ring the bell, though, do we, Debbie? Because your kids aren't here, so we're okay there. But we'll go ahead and stop here, finishing with my favorite guy. I just think Samson's so interesting. And right up to the end, God still heard him. I wanted to talk about one more thing, and I'm out of time. Suicide. There are 7 suicides in the Bible, and counting Samson. But I was going to say, what do you think? But let me just tell you what I think. I don't think this is one of them. I think that in this moment, what we're not seeing a man who wants to take his own life. We're seeing a man who wants to be God's vengeance, and it requires him to die to do it. That he has to die to accomplish this. Sounds a little bit like Jesus even. You know, you have to die to accomplish something. And so I don't think that it's fair to put Samson in that category. I think Samson's death, and he goes to his death willingly, is not his purpose and intent. It's the consequence of what he needs to do here. And so that's just my opinion. You can disagree with that, and that's just fine. But we are at our time. Grant, would you lead us in singing tonight? I'll switch out and I'll take care of the invitation. So.